Hi BookTube and welcome to a new video. This is a tag. I haven't done a tag for a while and I was tagged by Sean the Book Maniac, and this tag was originated by Just Juan Reader. I shall place links to both of those in the show notes. And this is the Evita Book Tag, and at this point I have to do a disclaimer that by agreeing to follow this tag and fulfill it in line with BookTube tag demands, this is in no way represents an endorsement or even a condoning of musical theatre as an art form, legitimate or otherwise. And it recognises that, in fact, under certain circumstances, this goes against the terms of the Geneva Convention on Human Rights and Torture. Okay, that being said, on with the task. Number one, Oh What a Circus! A book in which death propels the story forward. Well, I'm going to choose Albert Camus' The Outsider, or L'étranger in the original, because that starts off with the famous lines, Mother died today, or was it yesterday? But interestingly, that's not really the death that propels the story, except in a sort of a roundabout way. Because it's a story of a man called Malraux who shoots and kills an Arab on the beach and is imprisoned and awaiting trial. And the problem is that society has to punish him because things like the death of his mother he was totally indifferent to. It had no resonance, no meaning to him. That's why he couldn't even remember if she died yesterday or today. So her death, the lack of any kind of emotional reaction to it, is why Malraux has to be punished for the actual act of murder that he himself enacted. Number two, Buenos Aires, a book in which atmosphere plays a central role. Well, I've got three for this. The first is Andre Malraux's, what's it called? The Royal Way, which is set in Cambodia, not that long after the mighty temple complex of Angkor Wat was discovered. It had been sort of totally overgrown by the jungle once it had been abandoned. And Malraux has two characters who go off in search of it because they're going to steal the bas relief, which has consistently happened since its discovery. It's much the sort of degradation of the structure itself. And it's a contemplation of death. It's a bit similar in a way to Heart of Darkness by Conrad. It's that sort of primitive nature, your sort of man's vulnerability in the face of it, and exposure to death and madness. And this is very similar, but just the atmosphere of the book oozes that sort of cutting through the tendrils of the jungle with machetes, and when will you ever reach it? And it's sweaty and it's humid and the animal noises. It's fantastically atmospheric. The second is Red April by Santiago. I'm going to have to read this. Roncagliolo. It's a Peruvian book, and it's set in just after the sort of ground zero, year zero terrorist outfit, Sendero Luminoso, the Shining Path, were finally defeated when their leader was captured and put on trial. And the book takes place in the area where the Sendero Luminoso first started, where it was a reaction against sort of corrupt government and local officialdom. And now that Sendero Luminoso are out of the picture, the state has reverted very much back to that sort of corruption. And it's again, the atmosphere is just suffused. There's murders going on, but it's suffused with the sort of do Sendero Luminoso still exist in the mountains surrounding this area? Are they ghosts or are they still active? And you realise pretty soon that this goes back far beyond the scale of the late 20th century, early 21st century. This is a sort of primordial struggle, a sort of Andean gods and sort of blood sacrifice, and it's been played out consistently, just with different guises. So here it's sort of wanting to return to sort of the ready rhythms of Catholicism and the countryside sort of agriculture, versus the Sendero Luminoso and you know it will take different guises in the future. It's just a brilliant book, brilliantly atmospheric. Unfortunately, none of his other books seem to be translated to English, which is somewhat irritating. This was his debut, and he won a Latin American award for it. And then finally, a book I read recently, and I'll post the link to my review of it. I'm not going to go into detail, but it was Denis Johnson's *The Stars at Noon*, which is set in Nicaragua under the Sandinista, when they were being threatened by the Contras. And again, just like the other two, it's sort of set in sort of, you know, tropics, suffused with sweat and humidity. And Johnson really goes to town on the descriptions of that. You know, no one can do anything. No one has the energy to do anything, let alone establish a fledgling sort of state out of sort of revolutionary beginnings. So there are three great books where atmosphere totally makes them. Song 3, A New Argentina, a book revolving around power or politics. Well, in fact, most of the ones for the question before sort of could fulfill this, but I'll go with another book, and that is Michel Houellebecq's Submission, or Soumission, I think in French. Now, Houellebecq gets a lot of clog, A, for his perceived attitude towards women, B, and I think this is justified, he can be a bit sloppy and a bit erratic in his style as a writer, but he unflinchingly deals with social and political issues like no other writer. And the premise of this book is the Muslim Party have won the election and come to power, and they're not sort of radical Islamists, but one thing they do want to do is sort of you know, end the sort of racism that they, you know, the communities have been suffering. So there's a sort of positive discrimination, and everyone has to convert to Islam who has a state job, and he, being an academic in a university, falls under that. So the book is him very much debating whether he's going to convert to Islam to keep his job or not. But he himself, the character, is an absolute wastrel and is very lonely, and you know, so it's not just you know, tick boxing, thinking about Islam. You know, can Islam provide this sort of degenerate, which is what he is, you know, an actual faith, an actual set of core beliefs that, you know, pull him out of his own, you know, quite miserable life. It's a very clever book. So it gets a lot of clog, you know, because it dares to say unmentionable things, you know. What happens if France did elect an Islamic government? As I say, not even necessarily you know, a fundamentalist Islamic one. It's a terrific book. And just to say that the worst book I've ever written was also about politics, high politics in this case. This was called 10 Days by the South African writer, although she's now based in England, Gillian Slovo. And it was set in the 2011 riots that absolutely racked England. I say England because they didn't riot in Scotland and Wales, Northern Ireland. And, you know, these were very serious social and consumerist riots. And Slovo manages to portray just one rioter throughout the whole book. And he is shown not rioting as much as pulling people out from a burning building. And the whole book for her is cited among the politicians, you know, the Prime Minister, the Home Secretary and the Metropolitan Chief of Police, and their own political ambitions. And it's, you know, it's a absolute anathema horror show, you know, just completely ignoring the people who were at the heart of the riots, for these people who were, you know, very distant from it. And it's my most detested book of all time. Song 4, Don't Cry For Me Argentina, a classic book. Well, you know, that's a bit broad. So I went back to one of the other meanings of classic, which is, of course, classical civilizations of Rome and Greece. So I've gone for Up the Line by Robert Silverberg, which is a science fiction book where there is sort of time travel tourism. And one of the tourist guides has the sort of classical Greek and Byzantium, that's his realm that he guides people through. And each time you go back, you have to not acknowledge or interact anyway with your previous selves who are leading previous partners, because that time, Byzantium Greece, is fixed, and yet for the future they keep different parties, keep going back, led by this same tour guide. So that's the fundamental rule of time travel: is you mustn't interact, because you'll destroy and warp the timeline. But the other thing is, of course, you mustn't interact with the people from that time, and he falls in love with a beauty, and it's a it's a very good book. So that is going to be my classical. Not perhaps in the spirit in which the question was mentioned, but there again, this is a musical theatre tag, so I'm not in the spirit in which it was probably conceived. Question 5. A Rainbow High. A book that is majestic or grandiose. Well, I'm going for Darconville's Cat for this one by Alexander Theroux. Massive 750 page, sumptuous, gothic, modern gothic piece about an academic in a university in Virginia. And it's just the language. The language is definitely grandiose. I don't think there's been a book that I've read that I've had to look up so many words, and some of them either weren't in the dictionary or he made them up. They were neologisms, and it's a wonderfully sumptuous read. I couldn't really tell you what the plot was about, apart from his dean of the university, who's this sort of misogynist on acid. I do remember that character, but it was a great read. It was a fantastic read. 6. And the money kept rolling in. An expensive or cheap book? Well, I'm just going to post a link to this because I have talked about this before on other tag videos, which is Michael Gira's book, The Consumer, which I don't own. I don't own because initially it was very expensive. It's out, it's out of print. It was basically self-published in the 80s or 90s. So I'm not talking about Kindle self-published or Create Space self-published. It's probably sort of fanzine, although it's a book. And long out of print. Michael Gira is a musician, a band called Swans, but he was also writing these short stories which are just knockout brilliant. And then he collected them together in this book called The Consumer, only published and available in New York originally, and you can't get hold of it now. Second hand, unfortunately, it was published in German by a sort of small German publishing house. So if you can read German, you can get hold of it. But it's so expensive. The original American issues of it are so expensive. Sort of $100 plus, which I'm not prepared to pay for a book. So I've been chasing this book since the 90s, possibly even the late 80s. I can't remember exactly when it came out. So that is the most expensive book. I've never read it, and I don't own it, and I see no prospect, ever coming to own it. So there you go. I'm going to just throw this open to any lovers of musical theatre. If I haven't sort of alienated you by my stance on the subject, enjoy. Thanks very much. Till next time.